Raids in Guild Wars 2 can sometimes have a lot of downtime because you want to swap your composition or build for a specific boss's mechanics, and that's why the Condition Hybrid Virtuoso build is very popular right now, because it can cleave multiple targets. It has range damage, so it's safe. It's also got a lot of survivability through its invulnerability and blocks. It has CC. So in this video, I'm going to be going over the Condition Hybrid Virtuoso build, the gear, and how to use it in a real scenario. So first off, let's check out the build. This is a hybrid build that gets a lot of its condition damage from landing crits. So you want as much crit chance as possible, as well as much condition duration and condition damage as possible. So how we get that is by going for the sinister stats. This does not give any condition duration, but since bleeding is the main condition of this build, we'll be getting our bleeding duration from the Rune of the Crate and from the Agony Sigil. So you only need around 23% condition duration, and then we'll get the rest of our condition duration from a very affordable food, the red lentil cebosas. That'll get you to 30% condition duration, and then you'll get the rest of the way from your Rune of the Crate and your Sigil of Agony. So we've got 100% bleeding duration now. We've got 46 crit chance, and you'll get a lot more crit chance from the Virtuoso trait line and Fury. And then we've got a lot of condition damage. So essentially we want a Sinister armor set with the Rune of the Crate. We've got Viper weapons, a dagger with a Agony Sigil, a Focus offhand with the Earth Sigil, and a sword offhand with the Earth Sigil as well. Your dagger will be used in both weapon sets, so you don't need two of them. And then you want full Sinister Ascended trinkets, except for the Viper's ring. If you can't get Sinister gear or Viper's gear, then you can go for Rabid because it's a very cheap option, and it still gives you the two most important stats you're getting from your gear, which are precision and condition damage, and then the rest of your condition duration is coming from runes anyways. For traits, we're going to go for Dueling and Illusions because those two give the most hybrid synergies. In Illusions, we want Shatterstorm because it gives you more F1 charges, and your F1 still does a lot of damage, especially because you give Torment on all of your shatters. And we go for Phantasmal Force because there aren't really any better options here, and this is just going to give you extra power damage on your phantasms. In Dueling, we get a little bit more Fury, which is going to give us extra critical chance on our phantasms, which is really important because our crits on our phantasms are going to bleed, and bleeding is really important to this build, so we'll talk about that in a sec. But Fencer's Finesse is just going to reduce the cooldown of sword abilities and give you some extra ferocity. Not too important though, because mostly we are relying on conditions. Then we go for Superiority Complex because Ineptitude, while it can be good if you also take Blinding Dissipation, it's going to amount to more damage over time, especially on fights where bosses don't have really high attack speed. It's going to amount to more damage to just get more power synergy, but on some fights where conditions like Confusion are stronger, then you definitely might want to go for Ineptitude and the Blinding Dissipation package. But in general, Superiority Complex and Fencer's Finesse is going to do more damage. So one important thing here is you're getting Fury as well, and Fury is stronger on Virtuosos because normally it gives 25%, but on Virtuosos it gives 40. And that's going to get us to like 80 to 90% crit chance. And whenever you crit with a blade attack because of Jagged Mind, you're going to bleed the target. And bleeding is not only 25% stronger, but it will also give you a blade, which is your clones or the ammo that you need for shatters, every 5 bleeds that you do. So we've got the Earth Sigils, we've got the Phantasms bleeding, we've got any of our blade attacks, which are the shatters or your dagger attacks, will bleed. And that's giving you tons of shatters back. And since the shatters count as blades, that's also giving you more bleeds and therefore more blades back. Your number one priority is to use any of your shatter abilities when you have 5 blades. You always want to use your shatters at 5 blades because they're the most powerful then, and because you can't gain more blades when you're at max. And when you gain blades, you gain the compounding power buff, so you want to keep that up non-stop. And using your F1 ability also gives you the deadly blades buff, which increases your condition and power damage. So you want to be constantly using those. Prioritize using the F2 because that will give you the most damage. And then you want to use your F1, which does less damage. But since you have 2 stock of it, you always want to make sure that that is always on cooldown as well. If your F2 and F1 are on cooldown, you can use Signet of Illusions, and that will recharge the F2 and the F1, and you can use them again. But you only want to do this if you have enough blade generation to use a 5 blade shatter. Otherwise, you can use Blade Turn Requiem, which will pulse AoE around you, but you need to be in melee for that to hit the target. And that will also give out Torment because of the trait in Illusions. After you've used your blade songs, you want to use your Phantasms on your 5 skill. So the Phantasm on Focus does the most damage because it hits the most times, which means it does the most bleeding. And then you want to use your Signet of the Ether and get a second cast of that. Then you can swap to your sword and use the 5 for the Phantasm there. Your Phantasms will also shoot out an extra blade afterwards, so they're generally the best skills to use when you don't have most blades because they give you the most blades. And then after you've got your blades on cooldown and both Phantasms have been used, you want to use your dagger abilities. So your dagger 3 sends out a blade storm, and this will pulse damage as it passes through the target, and it keeps going. So the longer it's in range of the target, the more damage it does. So you want to use that far away and in a direction that makes it spend the most time near that enemy. Your 2 skill Blade Call is a shotgun effect, which goes out and then comes back in. So you ideally want to use this in melee range to ensure that it hits all of those hits and gets you the most bleeding. As far as your utilities, you always want to go for Signet of Midnight and Signet of Domination because they increase your condition duration and damage. But the active effects can also be useful situationally. So Midnight is a stun break and Domination is an extra CC, though you'd have to give up a little bit of your damage to get those effects actively because they would remove the passive. The third utility slot can be Signet of Illusions, but not every fight goes through your entire rotation for you to get value off of recharging your shatters. So you can go for another utility there based on the situation. Like if you're in a fight where you need to do a mechanic really quickly, you can take Blink and that'll help you to do it very fast. Or if you're on a fight where portals can be useful, take Portal. Your elite skill though, you have the option between Signet of Humility, which is just extra CC, or you can go for the Virtuoso Elite, which does some extra damage but is not really too important. So usually if the fight requires any CC, you want to take Humility. In any kind of fight though, you want to get used to using your F5 skill and your Sword 4 because these are blocks that will do damage, and instead of using your actual dodge, you can avoid damage while actually doing damage yourself. And of course, in situations where there's a lot of things that will do damage to you, you want to use your dodges and your blocks. So you want to make sure that you're using your Sword 4, your F5 to block attacks, and if you have full blades, you can use a really long distortion and just sit there and DPS while avoiding all mechanics. The main appeal of this build is that most of your attacks will actually pierce targets. So if you hit one target in a line, it will go through that one and potentially hit another target behind it. But this really requires you to have good positioning and targeting, because if you target the nearest target, then it doesn't pierce the one behind it necessarily. But if you stand next to the one that you want to pierce and then target the one behind it so that it goes for the furthest target, then you can more reliably land your attacks on multiple targets. And this is really good in fights where you have to choose between which target you need to attack, and it often means that it takes twice as long to kill both of them. Once you realize that you don't need to be on top of your target to do damage to it, you'll realize that this is actually a really good build for doing a semi-kiting or tanking role, because normally you'd have someone who's very supportive do a tanking role, but supports are not ideal tanks because you want them on the group giving them boons and heals. So a class that is very tanky but can still do damage while doing mechanics is kind of ideal for this role sometimes, and that makes this build an ideal tank because it is so survivable, it has good sustain, and it can pretty much do its job without requiring you to be with the group. Now, this isn't necessary for you to play as a tank. Obviously, you can just play it as a DPS, but it is a very safe option for a DPS as well. So this is why it's one of the best builds. It can do multiple roles. It has a very safe DPS rotation, which is actually kind of fun and spammy. And it's just in general useful to your team. But if this content was useful to you, then consider liking and subscribing to help me out. Check out the links in the description below, and I will see you all next time.